Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to our Leaders Over Lunch series, State of Black America. I'm Dr. Keith Motley, and typically I'm here on these programs serving as Chancellor Emeritus of this city's great public university, the University of Massachusetts, Boston, or as a professor there. But today, I humbly serve as the consultant, president, and CEO of the outstanding Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. And my co-host for today, for Leaders Over Lunch, is our chairman, the chairman of the board of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts, Attorney Joseph Feast.
I want to say thank you very much, Dr. Motley. Thank you, Marc Morial. It's rare when I lose an opportunity to speak, so I'm glad that you reminded me that my mic was off. But I want to say first and foremost, thank you very much, Dr. Motley. You're doing an extraordinary job as our consultant, president, and CEO here at the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. I want to thank our guests from New York, but via New Orleans, Marc Morial, the national president of the Urban League of Eastern the Urban League, the National Urban League, and of course our mayor, Mayor Marty Walsh, has joined us as well. And Mr. Mayor, to all of you, I just want to be able to say thank you. This is an extraordinary time for us to be able to do this, and I certainly want to have us to have a great discussion today. And so, Dr. Motley, I'm going to pass it back to you.
And so, thank you all again for joining us. I want to say that the audience today will have one of the key features, which will be to be able to go into our Q&A feature to ask questions that you may want to ask of our president. But before we do that, I want to say thanks to the staff in advance. This Urban League staff put together an incredible event today. I want to give thanks to Natalie Haywood, Alvin Peters, Otnell Uter, and to William Watkins, who is behind this production today. Now, this is an hour-long show. We want you to sit back, enjoy the conversation, but go get some lunch, sit down and have some of that lunch with us. And so, Chair Feaster, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Leaders Over Lunch program?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Dr. Motley. This idea was, I really say, the genesis of Dr. Motley to have this Leaders Over Lunch. And what we attempt to do through this process is to bring information to our viewing audience. It's a conversation with men and women in leadership in business, government, community development, and religion. And we want to have a candid conversation, and we want to talk about the strengths and weaknesses, threats and opportunities that are important to us all, whether it's happening in the city of Boston, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, or throughout the nation. And so we want to bring distinguished folks like Marc Morial to come speak to us, our mayor to come speak to us. And so therefore, that's what we attempt to do with Leaders Over Lunch. So Dr. Motley, back to you.
So we're so honored to have our Urban League National President, Marc Morial, with us today. Welcome, President Morial. But let me just tell these folk, if they don't know, a little bit about you. First of all, he's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania with a degree in economics, and then went on to Georgetown Law School and received his Juris Doctorate degree. After 2 years with his New Orleans law firm, he opened his own firm in 1985. He served as mayor of New Orleans from 1994 to 2002. He's been president of the United States Conference of Mayors, but he also has been a Louisiana State Senator from 1991 to 94. But in 2003, he was appointed the president and CEO of the National Urban League and has not looked back. Since that time, the empowerment agenda has worked to re-energize the league's diverse constituencies and to build on the strength of its nearly 100-year-old legacy and to increase its profile both locally, nationally, and might I say, internationally. So let me just say to Chair Feaster, I see somebody down in the corner. Who's the person that I see down there in the corner of this conversation today that isn't our president, Morial? Who's that other guy?
Well, it's a person who, Dr. Motley, that you and I have known for a long time from when he served as a state representative in his second term of as mayor of this great city of Boston. Is the one and only, the Honorable Marty Walsh, the mayor of the city of Boston. Mr. Mayor, welcome. We've enjoyed here at the Urban League the opportunity to work very closely with you and your administration. You have Dr. Motley and me working on so many aspects of your administration. If we started to name the things you've asked us to be involved with, we would take up the entire hour, but we've enjoyed doing it. And welcome. Give you an opportunity. You have the floor, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Joe. And I want to thank you, Joe, for all that you do. Joe, you've been a friend for a long time, and I appreciate it. Dr. Motley, just, you know how I feel about you. What you've done in our city in so many different aspects, from UMass Boston all the way through, and even before your days in Northeastern. Thank you for everything you've done. Henry Thomas from Springfield as well. But I want to talk about President Morial for a minute. He is a friend, a great leader in this country, a former mayor. He understands the conflicts that we're going through in the city right now, not just as a leader of the Urban League, but also as a former mayor and a former legislator, and understanding that. So it's great to see everyone and hear your thoughts and where we are in America right now. I won't take too much time because I don't think people tuned in to listen to me, but this week we talked off air about Jacob Blake and who was shot in the back 7 times in front of his children in Wisconsin. And the way I described it the other day, I was talking to a friend of mine. I was like, enough is enough. This case is horrifying, demands accountability and justice. As a country, we need to come together to end the cycle of brutality against Black and brown communities once and for all. Real change demands real action from every single level of government, and quite honestly, not just government, but business and the private sector as well. I think we focus too much sometimes in one area, but I think it's across the board. As mayor, I take this responsibility seriously. Those of you that are listening, Joe Feaster is on a commission right now looking at police reforms in Boston. In 2015, when President Obama put some reforms across the country, we jumped into that one, and we're looking at it again. Dr. Motley, I can't name the things that he's on there, but there's so many things that he's been working with us on as well, and one of them was during COVID-19, our Health Inequities Task Force. This summer, we've embarked on many reforms. We declared racism a public health crisis in the city of Boston. Obviously, we're looking at it now, looking at the health inequities and racism. We're looking at the housing inequities and racism. We're looking at the employment inequities and racism. We're looking at the health inequities. So we're looking at all those different areas. We established an equity cabinet, first in Boston's history. I announced that, and I just tell people that don't understand the name I'm going to mention to you, Google it. Google her, I should say. Dr. Carolyn Crockett serves as our first chief of equity. Just Google her name and see what she's done. I'm not going to go too much into Dr. Crockett right now. We're establishing a Boston Racial Equity Fund that's going to invest in local nonprofits to empower Black and brown residents in economic development, public health, youth employment, arts, education, so much more. But also, we're working with the new Commonwealth Fund, which is investors, Black investors, who are raising a fund as well. And these are not competing; these are working collectively together in how we move forward. We're working on police reforms, as I mentioned. We're allocated money from the overtime budget to trauma counseling, to housing security, and ending youth homelessness, violence prevention, and I think that's the key piece. Language access, food insecurities, immigrant advancement, elder support, and so many other places. We put $2 million into supporting people of color and women-owned businesses, $2 million into mental health services when police respond to public health crises. $3 million to the Public Health Commission is going to help us to combat systemic racism. I did the important things in the very beginning after George Floyd was murdered. We signed on to the Obama pledge. We created a new task force. We recently banned the use of facial technology by law enforcement here in Boston. We never had it, so we won't have it. We still obviously have a long way to go, and I think it's really important that people understand we're trying to, in Boston, show that change is possible. It's a testament to the culture and teamwork and trust that we need to build and continue between our residents, our police, our local governments, our clergy, our nonprofits, all the groups. The Urban League of Massachusetts is a tremendously important partner in the city of Boston and a powerful advocate for the people in our community. So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to say a few words today. Marc, Mr. President, it's great to see you.
Great.
Love seeing you here. Thank you. To Keith and Joe, for all that you do. Again, I know it's not about the credit, but for all that you do in so many different places, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. These two guys, in their heart is as big as our city, and they care about people in our city. So thank you for that. And to Henry Thomas, great to see you. And I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to mute myself right now, and I'll do whatever I'm told. Okay?
All right. Well, we're grateful that you could spend some time with us, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much for that. I do see that President Henry Thomas from our Springfield that leads all of Western Massachusetts and is a legend in Springfield has joined us. But I got to get to our president right now. We're going to bring Henry in to ask some questions a little bit later. But first of all, welcome again, President Morial. We're so honored to have you here today. And, you know, we noticed the last time we had a chance to listen to you during our National Legislative Day for the National Urban League, we noticed some books behind you. And one of them, I think it said the Gumbo Coalition. And it seemed to say it was a leadership guide. And it was all behind you on that screen. And so I want you to talk a little bit about the Gumbo Coalition. There it is. It's being held up. You know, a book that helps to unite, inspire, and achieve. Now, your book came at a perfect time. But how do you believe that this book will help today's leadership managing through this pandemic and beyond?
Well, let me first of all thank all of you for joining. I want to thank certainly Chair Feaster for his great career, but also for taking the mantle of leadership at the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts.
Thank you.
Certainly you, Dr. Motley, for continuing to serve the community in this new role and bringing a sense of direction and stability to one of our most important and oldest affiliates, the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts, and to Marty Walsh, one of America's great mayors, who continues on the shoulders of many other great mayors of Boston in thinking in a progressive and pragmatic way. His understanding and willingness to sense the times, and that City Hall and the mayor's office must and can be a leader in this new era where there's a focus on racial justice and equity. I want to thank him for taking time out of a demanding schedule to join us this afternoon. And let me just talk about I'll just say this about the Gumbo Coalition. You know, writing a book is an intimidating thing. And then when you get started, you're like a hog in slop. You just and you're trying to figure things out, and you're trying to remember things, and you're calling people on the phone saying, hey, you remember X, you remember Y? Well, you end up with way more stories than you can fit into the book. And the publisher I work with said, write a leadership book. Yeah, a book, that's what people want to hear. They want to hear lessons of leadership. And my lessons of leadership are lessons I learned from others, by working with others, by observing others, lessons I learned from getting knocked down, right? And things not going my way, and having to understand how to pick up and readjust. And so the book is not a textbook, it's a real leadership book, because all of the stories in there are real stories. They're people I was involved with, they're situations that occurred over a long, long period of years. You know, one of the things I loved doing when I was a little boy is going to the barbershop. And I sometimes, you know, in the old days, you had to go and wait. And, you know, when I was very little, my mother would drop us off 5, 6, 7 years of age. She'd drop us off and forget about us. And we might be there 3, 4 hours. But I always remember, I love listening to the old guys talk. You know, you're sitting there just eavesdropping. And they're talking about everything. They're talking about horse racing. They're talking about politics. They're talking about women, right? They're talking, it's a guy's kind of place. And, you know, you learn a lot by listening to elders, you know, and people you come into contact with, whether they're family members or friends or people in the community. So I owe a lot of my leadership to what I learned from others and what I learned from experiences. And and also the crucible of City Hall. Mayor Walsh, the best job in American politics is being mayor of a major American city, of being a mayor of your own hometown. There's no job like it. The most demanding job in America is being mayor of a major American city. It's the hardest job. The president has motorcades and a force field around him. When you're the mayor, you right there. You right there in the community. People come up to you. They bring their grievances. They bring their questions. They bring their suggestions. And that's what makes it so authentic. There's the media. They're following you around wherever you go. They want to know what you think. I mean, it's a great. So I learned a lot serving as mayor and serving in the legislature. And what I try to do in the book is impart some of what I learned with the hope that people who read it, who are aspiring leaders, will pick up and learn from what I learned. And that's the whole spirit of the book. But it's not about theory. It's all about practice. It's all about real things that happen to real people. And at the Urban League, at the National Urban League, I've had the great, great honor to work with so many great leaders like Henry Thomas. It's just a voice of wisdom, a voice of reason. And when I talk to him, I learn from him because he's got a long perspective on prior, if you will, eras in the Urban League, but also prior eras in the history of the nation, the history of civil rights, the history of Black people, and that he's imparted and shared. And sometimes he may be sharing things with me and he doesn't realize he's teaching, but he is teaching. And I think sometimes if you think in that way, if you always say, look, every day I wake up, I can learn something, right? I can learn something about the world, about the situations, about solutions, about challenges. Sometimes you learn things about yourself. And that's the spirit of the Gumbo Coalition. The other thing I'd say about the Gumbo Coalition, it reflects my vision. Mayor Walsh knows this, when you run a diverse city, you got to have a diverse coalition. And holding together a coalition and building a coalition is not the easiest thing to do because you're never going to get a unanimous agreement on everything. It's impossible, right? So you learn to work and build, coalitions. And the spirit of the Gumbo Coalition and the term the Gumbo evolved from our first campaign to reflect basically the multiracial nature of the coalition we were trying to build to get elected. And gumbo, of course, is a dish with multiple ingredients. It's a very New Orleans dish. So when I said gumbo, everybody knew what I was talking about. Right? Everybody can be in the gumbo, yet it makes one dish, and we can always add to the gumbo, and it gets better and better.
Well, Mr. President, I had the pleasure of reading the book, and hopefully, as I said, you would have an opportunity to have a full discussion with you to talk about different aspects of the book. I get so many words of wisdom came out of that, and little words from drumline to roots to all of the things that were in there that we can talk about. But I find it prophetic for today, because here we are. Back in 2005, you were in New Orleans, going back to attend a funeral for a legend as the president of the Urban League of New Orleans at the time. And you were at the funeral, Katrina was hitting. And you were there trying to, in fact, you had to convince your mother to leave from there to go up to your sister's house in Baton Rouge. And you even talked about the loss of things that the family lost, et cetera, one of which was your little red book, which you got from your grandfather. Just to tell you, I just want to point out to you, I did read the book and I paid attention. But what I would like for you to talk about today, and I want us to take a moment of silence just for the families and friends who are going to be faced with now another storm, because that's why I say it's prophetic, because that was August 29th, 2005 when Katrina hit, and now they're faced with another. And I'm sure you have family, friends, colleagues that are there, as well as many of us on this participating in this program today. So I would just like us to take a moment of silence for that, and for you to draw the parallel to what's going on there. And as well, you talked about in the book how the federal government didn't respond with Katrina. we're faced with the situation now with COVID. I'm sure you can draw those parallels. So we can take this moment of silence just for the folks in New Orleans, and then to move into maybe your discussion on that. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Mr.
thank you.
President.
So reflecting on Katrina for a minute and the failure of governmental response, there are parallels with COVID. And one of the parallels was that the federal government's position at the time, and the president and his, at the time, George W. Bush, and his leadership team took the initial point of view that responding to the hurricane was a state and local responsibility pretty much exclusively. And those early days right after Katrina set off a pitched battle between the then mayor, the governor, and the president. Now, I will say that what was markedly different in that instance is once George W. Bush, after the first week and the outcry and the response and the outrage that occurred, George W. Bush pivoted to an extent and put a general by the name of Russell Honore in charge of the response, and he led the immediate response and the evacuation of the city. You know, in this instance with COVID, we still do not have a national plan. And why do we need a national plan? COVID is an international global pandemic. It's more than a national pandemic. When hurricanes and weather events impact the United States, they usually impact regions. In this instance, these hurricanes are going to impact southern Louisiana and southern Texas to an extent. There'll be an effect in states to the north of there, and there'll mainly be weather and rain. But with COVID, we have something unusual and unprecedented in modern American history. We have a pandemic, we have an emergency, we have a crisis that knows no bounds. I don't believe there's been a county in the United States that hasn't had at least one case. There certainly isn't a state that's been immune from this.
Right.
And that speaks to the need, and this is part of leadership you learn. You know, when you're the mayor of a city, you have to try to coordinate a lot of, interests. You got to try to coordinate your city council. If you're the mayor, you've got to coordinate your legislative delegation to some extent. You've got a congressional delegation that you've got to, coordinate or collaborate with when you have to execute a broad response. You've got a business community, a labor community, a faith community, community-based leaders that you've got to try to, build some harmony around a response and an approach. The president of the United States, when we say we need a national plan, we say we need a plan that is national, but also provides clear and unambiguous direction to governors and mayors and county executives and people on the ground that have direct response, that provides direction to the health sector and the hospitals and nursing homes of the nation, a framework to respond. And because we've not had a national plan, it's cost us lives.
Sure.
Because we've not had a national plan, we have the confusion, we have the politicization of mask wearing and social distancing, which should not be the case. We should be united as a country on the difficult and uncomfortable responses. Look, I've got 2 and 3 masks, got this mask, put this mask. It's no fun to walk around with this thing on when you go out, but you must, because we have to. And I think to tie Katrina to this is a crisis of multiple dimensions of Katrina. Let's just think about this. Now, Katrina was a crisis of insensitivity, incompetence. We lost about 2,000 lives. 9/11, we lost maybe about 3,000 lives. We're approaching the 200,000 people who've died because of this. 200,000. That's the size of a city like Newark, New Jersey. I mean, 200,000. You could take 9/11 and Katrina and the casualties and deaths in the Vietnam War and Pearl Harbor and put them together,
That's right.
and the total number of deaths would not equate to where we are now with COVID. And I want leadership, to indicate a sense of empathy and caring and compassion. Behind those 170,000, 180,000 Americans, there's families, there's children, there's grandchildren, there's spouses, their lives that have been completely disrupted, unended. And I have friends and family members. Just learned yesterday that someone I knew well in New Orleans, who was very well known as the Chocolate Santa, a man who dressed up as Santa Claus. And I can't tell you the number of events we did together when I was in office, died because of COVID. So this instance that we face, this crisis that we're in, is of significant dimensions. And then it unmasks, because that's what we call this year's State of Black America report, unmasked. It unmasked disparities that we all know exist. It's exposed health inequities. It's exposed the economic disparities. And of course, it has with George Floyd and the most recent incident in Kenosha, Wisconsin, continue to outrage us and expose the very broken systems that we have of police community justice in this country.
So let's stay on the state of Black America now, because you talked about in the state of Black America, the Equality Index, a quantitative tool that tracks the progress of racial equality in America. So give us some context for that.
Let me explain a little history of the Equality Index. The Equality Index was born in 2003 and 2004, because when I joined the National Urban League, I thought we needed a statistical foundation to talk about racial disparities. Because
you believe in metrics?
Huh? Believe in metrics. Yeah, you gotta have metrics, right? I mean, hey, look, because you would hear discussion, and you'd hear people say, well, the disparities are almost gone. And then you'd hear some people say, it's worse than it was in 1960. And you'd hear a wide range of opinion. And I said, you know what? What is the truth when it comes to disparities? And so when we sat down, we said we have to put together something clean and simple. And that's where this index came in. Let me explain the way the index works. So fundamentally, the index works this way. If, for example, the average lifespan of white Americans, and this is a if, for example, was 100 years of age, and the average lifespan of African Americans was 73 years of age, then the index would be 73. So that index that we use encompasses 300 pieces of data. So where are we now? 73.8% is where Black Americans are. 78.8 is where Hispanic Latinos are. We are at 73.8%, about the same place that this index was in 2005. About the same place. It's changed relative, almost not at all. Now, inside the index, some disparities have narrowed slightly. Health disparities have narrowed slightly. Educational disparities may have narrowed slightly. Some have widened. Economics seems to widen a bit. Social justice seems to have widened a bit. So you're dealing with, and what I say to people, let's start the conversation about racial justice in this country with a set of facts, with a set of information, metrics. This information primarily comes from the Census Bureau, which is why the census count is so important. It comes from various other trusted, reliable, verifiable sources. And but keep this in mind. This index reflects numbers pre-COVID. So COVID is probably going to widen these numbers. I'm certain it will widen them in health. It may widen them in economics, because in economics, and the report deals with post-COVID, we have this phenomenon of if you're in a white-collar job, the propensity and possibility for you to work from home, do Zooms, Microsoft Teams, is more possible than if you're in a frontline blue-collar job, a so-called essential job. And many Black and brown Americans work in the service sector, and we know that's where the layoffs have been the greatest. So your Black unemployment rate is inching towards 20%, higher than 15, on its way up. The unemployment rate of Latinx is in the same category. The white number is high, 9 or so, 8, 9, still higher than it's historically ever been, except during the Great Recession. These numbers show disparities in economics are still real and that there's pain across the board. And so we want people to start this conversation by understanding that in COVID has worsened, right? It has exacerbated the disparities that exist in our nation. And we always want to focus in our conversation, then what? So how do we respond? How do we take action? What is it that we need to do from a policy point of view? And the protests that have taken place have been refreshing. The violence that some have carried out has been disappointing, but I choose not to allow the actions of a few to distract from the intentionality and the passion of the overwhelming many who are protesting because they're fed up with traditional approaches. They're fed up with, let's wait till the election, let's vote and sit aside. But having said that, the challenge for us today is, can that power, can that protest energy find its way into the ballot box on November the 3rd, which it must, because if we are going to change things, a lesson we must learn from the 1960s and even the 1950s is that the activism was designed to change the law, change public policy. Dr. King didn't make the I Have a Dream speech for the sake of people saying, boy, you made an inspiring speech. He made it because he was trying to shape public opinion, as was Whitney Young and Bayard Rustin and A. Philip Randolph and Dorothy Height and Whitney Young, all of them, because they wanted Congress to do what? Pass a civil rights bill, pass a voting rights bill. So we have to channel protest energy and political energy into policy change. And so the report is a framework. It's a foundation. On Friday, I'll be joining Martin Luther King III, Reverend Sharpton, a number of us have gotten together. There'll be a commemorative event around the March on Washington. We're going to socially distance. We're going to wear masks. Those who can't, it'll be available online and also on television. The important thing there is we will be focusing on justice and policing, and we will be focusing on Congress and placing pressure on Congress. The Senate has not, the House has passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. There's a response to what we see, and that response has to be national. You heard Mayor Walsh talk about things that are happening in Boston. Many other cities are grasping the challenge of police reimagination, reform, reallocating resources, doing all the things that are necessary. So, this is a national and it's local too. It's got to operate on multiple levels, and the pressure and the activism has to include protesting, but voting, but participating at the ballot box, not becoming cynical, not becoming dejected, not being tricked by propaganda that suggests that people shouldn't participate and people shouldn't vote. We cannot surrender our power. We cannot surrender our right to protest, and we cannot surrender our right to vote.
Well, President Morial, you must have seen the script that was provided for me, because you have basically taken the question that I was going to pose to that. But I know how to pivot. I know I learned that from your reading your book Gumbo Coalition. So I know how to pivot to where because you talked about this in the book, and I want to do the comparison since you reached back in history. We come from organizations that are more than 100 years old, both NAACP and the Urban League. And you reach back in history as to those our predecessors who fought in a particular way. There are those who question whether we, Urban League or NAACP, are now relevant. That the way to go is the types of protests that are taking place. And you somewhat put that in context by what you said. I would like for you to elaborate on the piece that you talked about in the book. Are we relics,
So
NAACP and Urban League, or are we not?
we have to embrace by any means necessary, by any peaceful means necessary. And that means protest is protected by the First Amendment. The initial founding fathers of this country were protesters. The abolitionists were protesters. So the women who fought for the 20th Amendment were protesters. 19th Amendment were protesters. Protest is part and parcel of a democratic system. So is voting. So is shaping public policy. We, the legacy civil rights organization, the NAACP, National Urban League, Legal Defense Fund, Lawyers Committee, National Coalition, and NAN, we had our sleeves rolled up after George Floyd's death in June, working with Karen Bass, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, late night, Sunday night phone calls, right, for 1 hour, where we were discussing and planning for the introduction of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill. And what that meant is that people on the inside, like Karen Bass, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, Cory Booker and Kamala Harris on the inside of the Senate, those of us on the outside, were putting our heads together strategically about designing the legislation. And also, I should say, Vanita Gupta of the Leadership Conference was on those calls, sending in all of our recommendations and suggestions. Karen Bass and the staff on the House side, Cory and Kamala on the Senate side, shaping that legislation. And then us going out and advocating, myself and Vanita and Sherilyn testifying before the House Judiciary Committee. This is not simplistic. And we have to guard against this mindset that, well, you're legacy, we're new, and we need to embrace the lyrics of the song Glory. And Common puts it so eloquently. We need the wisdom of the elders and the energy of the young together. And what we can't allow is, there was a concerted effort in the mid to late 1960s by nefarious interests in our government through a project called COINTELPRO, which had as its objective to divide Black leadership, create resentment and rivalries, not constructive tension. Constructive tension is good. Constructive dialogue is good. But to create division and distrust in an effort to derail the movement for civil rights and Black empowerment in the 1960s. Let's learn some historic lessons and recognize that in this broad movement, we're going to have different generations and different points of view in the Black community. We're going to have allies of other communities that are necessary for this, that this is not a solo show. This is not a one-person show. One of the media people said, who are the leaders of this movement? And I said, well, you're a leader of this movement. He says, but I'm in the media. I said, but you're covering it truthfully. I said, we need to understand this differently. This is a movement of many, many leaders.
Speaking of many, many leaders in the movement, We have one with us today from, from all the way from Western Massachusetts, the legendary president of our Urban League in Springfield, Henry Thomas. Henry, can you hear us right now? Yeah, we
Put
need
your
to
mic
hear
on.
you.
Unmute. Unmute.
Okay.
Henry.
Okay.
Now can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right.
So, listen, man, welcome. I just want you to know, Mr. President, I know there's several on the President Morial, that it's been wonderful for me working with our colleague in bringing this entire Commonwealth together under the umbrella of the Urban League. He's been an incredible mentor. He drives home the four pillars. He drives home these notion of the E3, which is what is it? Equity and go ahead.
Excellence equals empowerment.
Empowerment.
Yeah.
He's driving that home with me, but he also reminds me of the jewel they have in Camp Atwater. But he also reminds me that he has incredible access to you. But then I had to remind him that two of your vice presidents have lineage to me because they were my former students, etc.
Well,
But
and I'll just add one thing to that. I have a connection with your chair of the board of directors,
oh
who is my
Lord,
Omega side.
Oh,
brother.
see, President Morial, didn't I tell you I didn't have to raise it?
Doc, I'm giving y'all a pass because I love you so much.
there you go. There you go.
But I tried to I couldn't get my gold on, so I just put on yellow, but it's really purple and gold.
All right.
Black and that gold right there. I'd have been fooled, man. You got the black in the Urban League pin and the gold.
So anyway, Henry, we've been having an incredible conversation, as I'm sure you've been hearing. Just wanted to give you a chance to ask any question that you'd like of our president and get into the conversation with us. Go right ahead.
Well, first of all, let me just say that it's an honor and a pleasure to have an opportunity to be with all three of you. All of you are incredible human beings in your own right, and all three of you have and continue to make a tremendous contribution to the uplifting of Black and brown folk and people in general. Because if you uplift Black and brown folks, you take care of everybody else automatically. So I consider it an honor and a delight to be here with you. Marc Morial is my leader, and he has served the National Urban League extraordinarily well for I think 17 years now, Marc, right? And I think that I don't know if you had a chance, Marc, to share the information about the new development that's going to happen in the middle of Harlem.
We haven't talked about that just yet.
Okay. Well, I would like to ask you to share the entrepreneurial spirit that over almost a 10-year period where Marc Morial refused to lose. He refused to quit. He had a vision as to what we could be beyond the words that we preach. We talk about being economically self-sufficient. We talk about having the ability to chart our course as to where we're going to live, where we're going to take care of our business. And he came up along with the board with a tremendous outcome. And so, Marc, why don't you share that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry. And, just in sum, we will break ground any day now on our new headquarters project. But it's more than a headquarters. It's going to be an institution called the Urban League Empowerment Center. And it's a mixed-use development. We're the owners of the building. We have 3 developer partners. There will be retail there. There'll be the first ever New York Civil Rights Museum, which is a project that we are stewarding. There'll be a new National Urban League Institute for Race, Equity, and Justice. We've got a 20,000 square foot conference center in the building, along with 170 units of affordable housing. So we are on 125th Street between Adam Clayton Powell and Malcolm X Boulevards.
Yeah.
We are 2 doors away from the Adam Clayton Powell building. So we're in central Harlem. We're in the middle of the action, and we want to practice what we preach. We preach self-sufficiency and ownership and institution building. For the last 25 years, we've rented space. Interestingly, prior to that, Henry knows this, the Urban League owned a building on 62nd Street, and prior to that, owned a building on 52nd Street. So this incredible institution somehow in the 1940s and 50s owned a building in Manhattan. And then they traded that building for another building in Manhattan. And so this is a spectacular project. And as Henry knows, about a little bit better than 10 years ago, the board of the league, knowing that our lease ran out, charged me to go look at options. And at that point in time, every option was on the table. Relocate to Washington, to Atlanta, to Chicago, to Philadelphia, stay in New York. We ultimately decided that we would stay in New York, but that if we were going to stay in New York, we were going to do something spectacular. We were going to do something that made a statement. We were going to do something that positioned us for the long term. And you know, one of the things that inspired me in doing this is learning that some 70% of our affiliates own 1 or more pieces of property. And that was interesting to know. So the easiest sell for this project were the affiliate leaders, who some of them said, well, it's about time. By the time you stop paying rent, we stopped paying rent a long time ago. And so, and the board has been enormously supportive. So this is a $240 million project.
Wow.
This is a project that we've done with 3 developers, including our lead developer is an African American by the name of Meredith Marshall. We've had African American lawyers, African American consultants. We're utilizing for our build out African American architects. We have a goal of 30% African American contractors on the build out. So we have our lead banker over at Goldman Sachs is a dynamic, rising African American banker who leads their urban investment group. It's been a joy to work with great professionals, many of them African American. Every one of them has been committed and proud to be part of the mission of doing this project. I think everyone understands that this is a bit of a temple in Black America. This is it's a special place that we're trying to create so that the league will be secure for the next 50 to 100 years. Instead of going to hotels for professional development and training, we'll be able to do it at our own headquarters. And we'll be able to bring in housing officials, elected officials, activists, business leaders on issues of race and equity for professional development. And the museum, which we are working on, will certainly incorporate features of the history of the National Urban League, but also have a significant focus in the history of Harlem and the contributions that many northern urban communities made to the cause of civil rights. So we've got a really great vision here. We have not yet completed our capital campaign, but we're about 55% through it. We reached the benchmark we needed to break ground, get the project moving, and I'm extremely excited about what we're able to do here. And we've had great political support. Governor Cuomo, the mayor of New York, and the previous mayor of New York, de Blasio and Bloomberg, also have been supported. Black elected officials and community leaders in Harlem have been, very supportive. But I might add, the location where we will build, we're the 3rd idea to build on that site in the last 35 years. So the other 2 struck out.
Right.
So in this project, I'm gonna tell you, there were two instances. I told him, I said, this project was in the hearse. It was past the church. It was in the graveyard. And it was just about to take the project out of the hearse. And I said, they said, well, what happened? I said, a hailstorm came. And nobody could get out.
Well, before Dr. Motley gets to you, Mr. Pratt, I have to follow up. Being a New Yorker and being one who had spent a lot of time in Harlem with Camp Menacing folks, etc., I just want to know what is going to cost to get a brick for the building in one's name. So you can have your people reach out to what a brick was. So when I go back to New York, I want to go by and show my family in terms of the feaster brick on the Urban League's building. So that's the only thing that I want to add to that conversation.
Dr. Motley?
Yes.
I just, your chairman Feaster mentioned Camp Menacing. Well, I just want our audience to know is that Chancellor Motley and I have collaborated, the Urban League of Springfield with the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts, and we are going to jointly figure out our strategy in creating Camp Atwater 2.0.
That's right.
When all your rooms are filled with meetings in your new location, Marc, I should say our new location, is that you can send them up for a retreat on 88.
Camp Atwater 2.0.
Yes.
And my nieces attended Camp Atwater, as you know, and my sister was involved with you, Henry. You know that.
So we got.
But I have to
silence for Marc to come out and fry some, cook some gumbo.
There you go. Gumbo, man. Well, I can't, but here's what I have to do right now, gentlemen. I need to ask this question because as an educator, it would be to not ask it with the opportunity of having our president on. School districts across the country are looking to have remote learning, Mr. President. The reports show that not only do we have a problem with distance teaching with our Black and brown households where 30% don't have connectivity, that 300,000 to 400,000 teachers don't have the adequate connection required for distance teaching. What are your thoughts about addressing something like that?
It's so timely that you would ask the question. At 4:00 today, we're hosting a webinar for all of our Urban League CEOs and Urban League education leaders on that very topic. And we have published a guidance it's called Restart Smart School Reopening During a Pandemic. And there's 4 principles. The one is health and safety come first. The second is family and community input. The third is an intentional focus on equity because you've got to give consideration to disparities with broadband and disparities with equipment. And then the fourth is resources and funding. Let me say this, we all know that remote learning is not as effective as in-person learning, particularly for younger children. We know that. And so whatever we do is not a perfect replacement for in-person learning, but may be necessary to keep our children safe, to keep our teachers safe, and to keep our families safe. Number 2, I would offer this, and that is that we again are suffering from the lack of strong federal oversight, federal planning. Number 3, the challenge with broadband and lack of computers or enough computers and broadband connectivity in the phone simply means that even with remote learning, we may lose some children to education. That's what the numbers seem to be showing, that some kids won't connect. Sometimes it's the situation at home. Sometimes it's they don't have sufficient equipment. So we're dealing in an environment. Now, what should happen? Congress should appropriate money. Every child ought to have a device, a laptop, a tablet with the proper software on it. Every home in America should have high-speed broadband connection. So the digital divide is impacting us here, and those are issues of equity and resources. So these principles, I'm sure, will be available online. But my point of view is we would like our kids to be back in the classroom, but we have to put health and safety first.
So I know, Mr. Chair, is there something that you wanted to ask at this point? Because I know our time is getting very short and we want to be mindful of our president's time.
No, I think our texting back and forth has made it such that in terms of, yes, we know that. I just want to thank President Morial, but why don't we allow him to give his final words, or you can close it out there, President Motley, either way. But certainly can give the president an opportunity to give final words.
Yeah, I want to especially thank you, Dr. Motley. Thank you, Joseph Feaster. Certainly, Henry, thank you for joining today and for all of your incredible work. And really appreciate the passion, the enthusiasm, the thoughtfulness that you are bringing to the leadership of the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts at this point. I want to pledge our commitment from a national Urban League perspective to assist in this transformation, in this effort. I think there's another National Urban League annual conference in Boston on the horizon.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, but
you must be reading my mind, Mr. President. No, we'll have an offline discussion.
Because we have great experience in Boston, and the city and the institutions in Boston rolled out the red carpet and really accommodated us, and it was a positive experience. Thirdly, I want to thank you for the effort to talk about the Gumbo Coalition and a leadership book. And hopefully people will go and it's available on Amazon, available on Barnes & Noble online. Take a look, help them in their leadership journey. There it is. And I had a great fortune to have Sheryl Sandberg do the foreword and my very good friend Magic Johnson to do the afterword. Mm-hmm. Those are very powerful additions to the book. And then finally, let us commit in this time. We have to commit in this time to do everything we can to seize this moment so that this moment of tragedy becomes a movement for constructive change and a movement to transform the racial justice landscape of this country. That is, I think, for our generation, a very important charge. We had the benefit of standing on the shoulders and walking through doors that were opened by the civil rights generation. You know, my parents, my grandparents were part of that generation. And their want, and Dr. King expressed it well, their want was for their children. Their want was for the next generation. They weren't thinking about themselves. So we, in this moment, who've achieved professional success and have an opportunity to lead and impact and influence and pull leaders, we have to channel that same energy, that same intentionality. We have to build an America and communities for our children and our children's children. And that's what this moment is all about. 2020 is 1968. 2020 is 1929.
There you go.
2020 is 1918. All of 1963, all absorbed into one in an incredible fashion, right? And so we have to seize this moment and seize this time. So State of Black America is available at stateofblackamerica.org or nul.org. You can not only look at the full report, you can go back and view our virtual series, which was how we rolled it out. But otherwise, thank you all so much. It's been great to be with you today. And long live the Urban League of Eastern Massachusetts. Long live the Springfield Urban League, and long live the National Urban League movement.
And we love it. And so we want to thank you, President Morial, for being here. We also want to thank Mayor Walsh.
Thank Mayor Walsh. I think he's left. Is Mayor Walsh?
Yeah, I will make sure
he
knows.
He told us he had to leave.
And then to our president from Springfield, Henry Thomas, to my co-host and chairman, Joseph Feaster, thank you. And to the audience for tuning in, want you to look out for our next Leaders Over Lunch, become a member of the Urban League, and visit our website, www.ulem.org, for more details, especially about our 1619 project. That's where we've got over 50 organizations so far ready to get out and take on the vote and make sure that people are able to vote without challenges at all the polls in Boston and beyond. And so we're looking forward to those conversations along with Mass Vote. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great day. And thank you, President Morial.
Thank you.